Study by the experts as they think it is that of a giant of prehistoric time.
This is one of the clues that kind of links with the legends that giants did exist. So this could be the same giants who are memorialized in these particular statues.
Now, another case in point is when I told Dr. Mose what we had learned from the Apache about cannibalistic giants and then God destroying them in a flood. And he looks right into the camera and he says, "Oh, yes." And then he reaches over and he picks up this illustrated book that he had authored that's used in the Navajo Nation schools and libraries. And he opened to show us an artist depiction of a giant that had stood between 30 and 40 feet tall. And then he starts saying there was this time when the earth was infested with such great giants and alien gods that came down and destroyed and ate the people. Some of them were in human form. Others, he said, were monsters like human-animal hybrids, which I think the Old Testament also describes. And then he followed that story with the famous Navajo legend of the White Shell Woman, who gave birth to two of the most important characters in Navajo mythology, the twin miracle-performing sons, one of whose names literally translates slayer of alien gods, and his twin brother. And together, those two great warriors killed many of the giants, hybrids, and the monsters that were destroying mankind.
Okay, Owen.
As Dr. Mose described these ancient tales, I couldn't help but think of David killing Goliath, and then later other giants with his mighty men. Then there was a point where Mose paused, and he said, "You know, when the Christian missionaries first came to America and told our people their stories of the giants and the great flood, he said, we smiled and let them know that we already knew these stories, that they had been told to us long ago by our own ancestors." So perhaps that fact is why so many American Indians find it natural to convert to Christianity, or why the nations seem to have no issues with many of their tribal elders and educators being converts to Christianity. After a week on the road, having covered hundreds of miles of reservations to walk amidst their multiple ruins, including hogans, temples, kivas, to follow guides and visit with a medicine man, not to mention tracking down and photographing petroglyphs, we were finally on our way to the last site that we were going to visit, one that our Cherokee guide had told us not to miss. We already collected enough pictogram and logogram images from ancient rock engravings throughout the Four Corners area to make our case and to calculate for our purposes a recurring theme, which definitely seemed to match the Middle Eastern and biblical stories of portals, reptilians, fallen angels, giants, and the havoc that those creatures had played on the old world. But this final petroglyph was important because our guide had said, and one we could drive right up to, by the way. So we decided to make one final excursion, this time into Utah, 50 miles north of Moab, where one of the largest known collections of petroglyphs is located in the San Juan County. This storyboard that we would visit there was etched in sandstone as early as 1,000 years before Christ. And it records practically every element contained in the Bible and extra-biblical texts involving spiral vortices and those who come through them, including human-animal chimeras and even giant six-fingered and six-toed footprints in pursuit of much smaller five-fingered and five-toed humans.
I don't hear it anymore.
Even that reptilian that Dr. Don Mose had described to us with its halo was drawn there, just a couple of feet away from the alien-looking bug-eyed creatures. This location is also easier to get to than most of the ones that we trekked to, yet it's as important, if not more so, than any petroglyphs. You could spend days hiking over miles of rough terrain to reach. It's called the Newspaper Rock Petroglyph, and is somewhat decipherable as to which images are older due to the fading and darkness of the earlier depictions, which are certainly the most mysterious with their alien-looking creatures and suits and what might even be some type of a flying craft. And archaeologists believe the writing on this Great Wall continued from 1,000 years before Christ or earlier up until about AD 1300, the same time that the Anasazi suddenly disappeared. So the writing stopped when the Anasazi disappeared. The Anasazi, who disappeared when the habit of this type of writing also suddenly ceased, used images and symbols similar to those found globally that connect to a first and second incursion of giants and the mountainous gateways that those creators came through. Now, that being true, if you take only the images that the Anasazi left behind and compare them to similar, in some cases identical, universal symbols found elsewhere around the world where the stories and meanings of the images have been made clear, and keeping in mind that these legends materialized globally at approximately the same time, it's more likely than not, in my opinion, that the universal story agrees with the record of every major culture of the ancient world in which the astonishingly consistent story is told of gods that descended from heaven and or came through spiral vortices to materialize in bodies of flesh. From Rome to Greece, and before that to Egypt, Persia, Assyria, Babylonia, Sumer, the earliest records of civilization tell of the era when powerful beings known to the Hebrews as watchers, and in the book of Genesis as the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, mingled themselves with humans, giving birth to part celestial, part terrestrial hybrids known as Nephilim.
There's a person standing there.
No, it's not.
Dude, have you seen what I've seen right now?
The Bible says this happened when men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, when the sons of God saw the women's beauty, and they took wives from among them to sire their unusual offspring. I believe a record of this first incursion of hybrid humans and six-toed giants is recorded in Genesis 6:4 when it says there were giants in the earth in those days. That's the first incursion before the flood. And also after that, that is after the flood, the second incursion, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Now, note that when the Torah, that is Genesis through Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Bible, was written around BC 1300, this would have been the same time when archaeologists believe the Anasazi across the world from these Bible lands were drawing giant, six-toed footprints on a slab wall in Utah and facing an alien enemy, as the name Anasazi implies. When the writings in the Torah are compared with other ancient texts, including Enoch, Jubilees, Baruch, Genesis Apocryphon, Philo, Josephus, Jasher, Jubilees, and many others, not counting the accounts of the American Indian tribes on this side of the world, it's clear that this is more than a legend. It is history. It's a chronicle told through different people's methods and worldviews involving giants suddenly infesting the entire world and then being wiped out in a flood. then somehow returning in a second incursion. This story was written down globally, from Hebrew scrolls to Indian petroglyphs, to provide the oldest recorded testament of part human, part angelic creatures who were in turn the offspring of hideous reptilian entities, or what the apocryphal book of Enoch calls fallen watchers. Similar to the paintings by ancient Anasazi, in documents found in Cave 4 among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a watcher named Malchrisha, who is described in the form of a terrifying reptilian whose looks were frightening, like those of a viper. And he was extremely dark, and his face is like that of an adder, the text says. Is Malchrisha, or his fallen cohort, the same as those halo-bearing reptiles that led the Anasazi to destruction? There's reason to believe they were, and after much comparison, I propose, as reasonably justified, a translation of the traditional Indian creation stories, together with the Anasazi's petroglyphs, as very telling. In the beginning, the great creator made everything. Then powerful reptilians came down from heaven through portals, the spiral, halo, and reptilian symbols that we found in the petroglyphs. They came to deceive the world, as Dr. Don Mose told us, and the world fell into darkness. This is also hinted in one of the meanings of the word Anasazi, which can literally be translated, according to the experts that we discussed this with, as an alien enemy.
You what, mate?
Yeah.